Dad left me his worthless gas station. Now my brothers want the $50 million secret inside. I never imagined that my father, the same man who would roll his eyes whenever I suggested making improvements to our family home, would leave me something so bizarre in his will, let alone a rundown gas station. But there I was, standing in a cramped law office, reading through the final lines of his estate documents. My older brothers, Malcolm and Elliot, were glaring at me from across the table, confusion etched into their faces. Neither of them had any idea why Dad would single me out like this. Truth be told, neither did I. It seemed like some cruel joke. They each received sizable inheritances, stocks, bonds, even the old lake house, while I got nothing but a decrepit little gas station on the outskirts of our tiny town. Worthless, Dad had called it once. The memory of his words stung as I flipped through the pages again, searching for some sign that this was a mistake. Dad and I had never been particularly close. Growing up, I was the dreamer, always sketching designs for new inventions or reading about the latest technologies. My brothers were the practical ones, the favored ones. Straight A students, star athletes, everything Dad could boast about. Meanwhile, I was the oddball who couldn't keep a steady job and spent countless hours tinkering with contraptions in the garage. But somehow, in the final reading of Dad's will, the worthless gas station on Route 12 went to me. What was his reasoning? A final jab? Some twisted sense of humor? I couldn't wrap my head around it. My brothers clearly thought I'd been stiffed, left with a money pit while they reaped real rewards. When the lawyer, Miss Harding, told us the reading was over, Malcolm and Elliot both rose to leave, offering me pitying glances. Malcolm laid a hand on my shoulder in a gesture that felt forced. "Hey, if you want to sell that place for scrap, I'll help you out," he said, trying to sound magnanimous. Elliot snorted. "Better off tearing it down. Dad never made a dime off that dump." My stomach twisted. As humiliating as it was, maybe they were right. The gas station was old, with peeling paint, rusted pumps, and a flickering neon sign that seldom worked. Dad had bought it years ago at some auction, presumably for a song, and used it for storage more than anything else. None of us understood why he'd bothered hanging on to it all these years. At first, I considered just ignoring it altogether, let it sit there and decay, but something in the back of my mind tugged at me. Maybe it was that part of me that always wanted to fix broken things. Maybe it was the memory of Dad once telling me, "There's more potential in any place than meets the eye if you only know where to look." I'd overheard him say that, ironically, to a neighbor who was complaining about the property taxes on that rundown gas station. Dad had sounded almost proud. So, with more curiosity than common sense, I decided to drive out to the station and see what exactly I'd been saddled with. Pulling up to Route 12 felt like entering a forgotten corner of the world. The asphalt was cracked, weeds poked through the edges, and the old station itself looked like it hadn't seen a customer in decades. The windows were grimy, coated in layers of dust. The sign above read simply "Parker's Gas," though half the letters had dimmed to near darkness. I stood by my car, the late afternoon sun beating down, studying the property. It truly seemed worthless, just as Dad had called it. But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more here, something I was missing. I rattled the locked door until I managed to pry it open. Inside, the air was stale and heavy with the scent of old rubber, gasoline, and a faint whiff of mildew. Dust motes swirled in the fading sunlight as I stepped over a broken tile. The shelves were empty, save for a few boxes of outdated inventory. A small counter in the corner bore the weight of an ancient cash register that looked like it belonged in a museum. I ran a hand over the surface, leaving a trail in the dust. It felt like stepping into a time capsule. Over the next few days, I made a project of it, cleaning, sorting, disposing of trash. I told myself I was just being practical, that if I was going to sell the place, it needed to look slightly more presentable. But the more time I spent there, the more intrigued I became. Dad had stashed all sorts of oddities in the back room. Old ledgers, crates of random mechanical parts, even a dusty jukebox that had once lit up the corner store of our hometown. I began to suspect that Dad had used this gas station as his personal storage unit for decades, piling up stuff he didn't want at home. Late one evening, after I'd spent hours sifting through rotted cardboard boxes, I found something unusual. It was a thick envelope tucked inside a rusted filing cabinet. The words "property documents" were scrawled on the front in Dad's handwriting. My pulse fluttered. Opening it carefully, I discovered an entire set of land surveys, old purchase agreements, and sketches. And at the very back was a typewritten note from my father himself. In it, he referenced mineral rights and undeveloped resource, mentioning something about a sealed negotiation with a big corporation. My heart pounded as I read the last lines. "The real value of Parker's Gas is beneath the surface. Keep it in the family." Beneath the surface? It sounded like something out of a treasure map. I skimmed the details, discovering that Dad had apparently discovered a significant resource under the property, one the local city zoning boards had never recognized or maybe never acknowledged. There were references to test drills and geologic surveys from decades ago. Could it be oil? Natural gas? Some precious mineral? My mind reeled. I couldn't be sure, but from the numbers and jargon, it seemed massive. And if Dad's note was accurate, this worthless gas station could be worth millions. 50 million, maybe more, if the geologic estimates were correct. I was still in shock when I heard footsteps crunching on the gravel outside. My heart jumped. I stuffed the documents back into the envelope, hurriedly pushing it under the counter. Then the door creaked open, and in strode Malcolm. He flicked on a flashlight, shining it around like he owned the place. "Hey," I said, swallowing the lump in my throat. "What are you doing here?" He shrugged, stepping closer. "I was driving by and saw your car. Figured I'd check up on you. Heard from the family grapevine you've been down here a lot. Guilt prickled my neck. Family grapevine. That meant Elliot was probably gossiping, or maybe mom had told them I was spending time at the station. I forced a casual laugh. Just cleaning up. Might try to sell it. Malcolm nodded slowly, scanning the half-swept floors, the piles of junk I hadn't tackled yet. Looks like you've got your work cut out for you. Found anything interesting? I shrugged, trying to keep my voice steady. Nothing but trash. I'll probably haul it out next week. He gave me a skeptical look, but dropped the subject. Before he left, he muttered something about how I could always give it up if it's too big a headache, and that he might take it off my hands for me. I managed a tight smile, trying not to betray the swirling chaos inside me. I wanted him gone, so I could go back to deciphering Dad's note in peace. Over the next week, I pored over every piece of paper in that envelope. The more I read, the more convinced I became that Dad had discovered a significant natural gas deposit beneath the station. The official records were incomplete, but from the surveys, it looked like a large swath of land around Route 12 was sitting on a pocket of valuable resources. Dad had apparently tried to keep it quiet. The note suggested he wanted to hold out until the time was right, or until he found a trustworthy partner for development. My heart pounded as I realized the scale of it. This was no small sum. We were talking tens of millions, maybe more. Suddenly, the station's old name, Parker's Gas, took on an ironic double meaning. I debated my next move. Part of me wanted to contact a lawyer, a geologist, or some investment firm. But another part, the cautious side, told me to keep this under wraps. My father's note had been pretty clear that it was important to keep the station in the family, which meant not tipping off the entire world before I figured out the details. But could I trust my own brothers not to swoop in and seize control? Or worse, to push me aside, just like they always had? I got my answer a few days later when I returned to the station after a grocery run and found the back door forced open. Heart in my throat, I rushed inside. The drawers were pulled out, the papers I'd carefully stacked were scattered across the floor. Even the hidden envelope was missing. My stomach sank as I combed the room in panic. Then I saw it. The envelope, torn open on the counter, the documents haphazardly strewn about. My mind raced. Who had done this? Just then, Elliot stepped into the doorway. I nearly jumped out of my skin. He was holding a single sheet of paper, a page from the survey. His face was a mixture of anger and something else. Greed? You lied to us, he spat, tossing the paper onto the counter. All this time we thought Dad left you a worthless gas station. Now I find out there's a gold mine underneath. My throat went dry. Why are you even here? He scowled, gesturing to the disheveled room. Malcolm and I suspected you were hiding something. He said you've been acting weird, spending all your free time here, so I came to see what you were up to. I swallowed hard. You broke in? He shrugged, unrepentant. Door was unlocked, he lied. But this explains everything. Dad found natural gas or something, right? You were going to keep it all for yourself. My pulse pounded in my temples. It was Dad's will. He left it to me. Elliot laughed. A harsh sound. You expect us to believe he just gave you a fortune? You must have manipulated him. My anger flared. I had no clue about any of this until after he passed. Elliot waved the paper in front of me. Then why hide it? Why not tell us? I opened my mouth, but no words came, because I knew what would happen if they found out. This exact scenario. They'd barge in, demand a share, probably take me to court. Elliot's eyes glinted. You better believe Malcolm and I aren't letting you keep this to yourself. Dad might have put your name on some worthless deed, but we all know who the real heirs are. My hands balled into fists. You both got your share of the will. The station is mine. Dad's note said. I bit my tongue, stopping myself from revealing more. Elliot smirked. Oh, there's a note? Good to know. By the time he left, my entire body was trembling with rage and fear. I realized with dawning horror that my father's carefully guarded secret was out. If Elliot knew, then soon Malcolm would too. And if they joined forces, they could easily overshadow me, financially, legally, and physically. They were older, more experienced in business dealings. I was just the dreamer, the tinkerer. How was I supposed to defend myself and Dad's final wishes against them? Sure enough, within days, Malcolm called, his tone cold and businesslike. We know about the resource. Elliot found the documents. We're prepared to invest in developing it, together. But you need to sign over controlling interest. We'll handle everything, and you'll get a cut. My stomach churned. A cut of my own inheritance? Are you serious? His voice turned hard. Don't be naive. You can't handle this alone. You'd need permits, capital, a legal team. Elliot and I can bring all that to the table. We're offering you a chance to be part of something huge. I exhaled shakily. Dad left it to me for a reason. Maybe he didn't want you two turning it into some corporate fiasco. Malcolm's laugh was bitter. You think Dad wanted you to squat on a fortune? Don't be childish. Sign it over or we'll drag you to court. We both know you can't afford that. I hung up, tears stinging my eyes. This was exactly what Dad had likely feared at, exactly why he'd quietly left the station to me. He must have known my brothers would capitalize on every advantage, overshadow me, then cut me out if they had the chance. But I wasn't the helpless kid I used to be. I had to protect what Dad entrusted me with, even if our relationship had been strained, even if I wasn't sure I deserved it. I sought legal advice. Miss Harding, the attorney who'd read the will, was no longer neutral once I hinted at the potential millions buried beneath that small property. I can represent you, she said cautiously, but this could get complicated. Your brothers have a strong financial position and might challenge the will. The pit in my stomach grew. But it's spelled out clearly, right? The station is mine. She nodded. Yes, the deed is in your name, but if they argue it was a mistake or that you manipulated your father, it could turn into a messy lawsuit. Do you have evidence that your father intended for you to benefit from the resource specifically? I swallowed. Just a note he wrote, not notarized or anything, but it mentions me keeping the station. Meanwhile, word spread quickly through the family. My mom called, hysterical. Why are you trying to shut your brothers out of your father's legacy? They've always been good to you. My aunts and uncles joined in, scolding me for being ungrateful or greedy. It was surreal. For years, I'd been the one overshadowed by my brilliant, successful brothers, and now I was cast as the villain for not handing over the one thing Dad had specifically given me. The tension reached a boiling point when Malcolm and Elliot showed up at my apartment one evening, unannounced. I opened the door to find them both standing there, arms crossed, expressions grim. We need to talk, Elliot said. I folded my arms. No, we don't. My lawyer will be in touch. Malcolm pushed the door open, stepping inside. We can settle this without lawyers, if you'd just be reasonable. My heart hammered in my chest, but I stood my ground. Reasonable means I hand over everything, right? I give you control and I'm left with scraps? Elliot sneered. Scraps? We're offering you a share in something we'll develop. That's more than you could do on your own. I shook my head. Dad wanted me to have it. That's enough for me. We argued, voices rising, until my neighbor knocked on the wall. Malcolm finally turned to leave, but not before throwing down one final threat. If you won't cooperate, we'll see you in court. You have no idea who you're dealing with. My insides churned. I felt trapped between preserving Dad's wishes and defending myself from my own flesh and blood. Yet part of me seethed with a fierce resolve. I wouldn't let them bully me into submission. Maybe Dad had known I was the only one who'd fight for what was right. The only one who'd treat this hidden fortune with a sense of responsibility rather than pure greed. Time blurred as the legal wrangling began. Letters from their attorney demanded I relinquish my claim or open negotiations. I refused, countering that they had no right to the property. My mother called, crying, accusing me of tearing the family apart. Meanwhile, Miss Harding helped me secure an appraisal from a reputable geologist. The preliminary results confirmed Dad's suspicion. There was indeed a large deposit of natural gas beneath the station and surrounding land. Potential value, over $50 million. Suddenly, the stakes were real, unfathomably real. My brother's demands escalated, culminating in a lawsuit. They claimed Dad was mentally unfit when he wrote his will, that he was coerced by me, apparently, into leaving the station in my name. The allegations were sickening. I found myself tangled in depositions, forced to defend my father's memory and my own integrity. The stress was crushing, but I clung to the truth. Dad had designated me for a reason. He believed in me, or at least believed I'd do something meaningful with what he'd discovered, rather than just chase money. The lawsuit dragged on for months, draining my finances and my energy. But in the midst of this turmoil, I unearthed something else in the station's back office. More of Dad's notes. They mentioned private conversations he had with a local environmental group. He wanted the natural gas to be extracted responsibly, ensuring minimal harm to the community. I read it all with tears in my eyes, realizing that Dad had been quietly planning a balanced, sustainable approach, something my profit-driven brothers would never do. It gave me renewed purpose. I wasn't just fighting for my inheritance. I was fighting for Dad's vision. Ultimately, Miss Harding discovered the perfect legal angle. Dad's will had a clause specifying that if any beneficiary contested the will in bad faith, they forfeited their share. This was standard boilerplate language, but Miss Harding argued that Malcolm and Elliot's lawsuit fell under that category. The judge, seeing no credible evidence of Dad's incapacity or my supposed manipulation, ruled in my favor. The brothers were forced to drop the case or risk losing everything else they'd inherited. The day the judge's decision came down felt surreal. I stood outside the courthouse, trembling with relief. My brothers stormed off without a word. Mom refused to look me in the eye. I felt a pang of sadness that our family had been torn apart over greed. But I also felt a wave of vindication and a sense that Dad was somewhere, nodding quietly, proud. I'd stood my ground. Maybe we hadn't been close in life, but in death, he'd left me something far more valuable than a chunk of land or gas rights. He'd left me the chance to prove myself to the world and to me. Now, months later, I'm finalizing a deal with a reputable energy company that prioritizes environmental responsibility, exactly the kind of organization Dad would have wanted. The terms ensure the town benefits from new jobs and revenue, not just me. My brothers have tried to undermine me still, whispering to neighbors that I'm a sellout or that I cheated them. But their bitterness no longer holds power over me. I know the truth. Dad entrusted me with this secret because he believed I could handle it with care, not just chase a payday. Standing at the old gas station, the sign still flickering, I can't help but smile. This place once looked so worthless, so full of dust and decay, but hidden beneath the surface was a fortune, and in a way, a chance to honor my father's legacy on my own terms. As I watch the evening sun dip below the horizon, I remind myself that family isn't always about unity or agreement. Sometimes it's about standing firm when everyone else demands you kneel. And sometimes it's realizing that a parent's true gift isn't the money or property, but the faith they showed in the child no one else believed in. I might have lost my brothers in the process, but I've gained a sense of purpose that can never be taken away. And that, I've come to understand, is worth far more than any $50 million secret hidden beneath the ground. Dad may never have said it out loud, but through his will, the one everyone else called a mistake, he gave me a chance to prove that determination, integrity, and a little bit of faith can transform even a rundown gas station into something priceless.